So a question I get asked a lot is, what do I do if I have too many critical controls? And generally I get asked this question by organizations that have an established critical risk management framework and process in place, and it's kind of got out of control and they're trying to dial it back. So one of the principles which I've said time and time again through a few different videos is my personal belief, maximum of 5 critical controls per critical risk, and that's for a large scale organization. If it's a smaller organization or a smaller site, you might consider less than that. So let's assume we're through this and we're then looking at an organization that's exceeded the 5. So there's a few things you can do here. So one is around is there a critical control selection flowchart and process that you've gone from, well, this is a control, ask a series of questions, a series of challenge tests to say, okay, well, now this is a critical control or eligible to be critical control. If there isn't something in place, I mean, we've got an example of one. If there isn't something in place, that I would suggest is a place to start. If there is something in place, then potentially take the critical controls back through that and just really challenge, do they all pass the test? In there also, in our view, we should be ensuring that we have things that aren't verification activities or monitoring activities, or things like training, competency and maintenance. They're not true controls, so we'd be ripping them out. So that could be an interesting filter. Also in here is control effectiveness assessment. So ensuring that those things that are eligible to be a critical control are effective controls in and of themselves. What good looks like is all critical risks have a hazard description which contextualizes the risk for your particular site. So let's say, for example, we might have a small manufacturing plant in the Brisbane CBD for a loss of control of a vehicle. The numbers of vehicles, the type of interactions, the speeds, and the fleet is going to be different from, let's say, a large open cut coal mine in central Queensland. So that's how we contextualise and really define the hazard. And once we've done that for all of our critical risks, then we can compare, are they apples with apples? So let's say, for example, a snake bite or a fauna bite or something like that, should that be one of the critical risks, versus a loss of control of a vehicle or something that could result in a multiple fatality outcome, they're potentially not on the same scale. And when we do that comparison, could we say, for example, well, look, you know what, I've set a maximum of 5 critical controls per critical risk, but in the interest of snake bites, I might just reduce that down to 1 or 2. And then that gives you either 3 credits that you could say, well, look, let's bump this one up to 8 if that one's at 8, or you can move some stuff around. And that's what I call the trading aspect, because not all risks are as critical as each other, even though they might meet the threshold. One that I don't like as much, but can be done, is grouping and consolidation. So let's say, for example, our critical risk was exposure to toxic and irrespirable atmosphere in a confined space. We might have 3 types of controls which are all sort of behaviour related and are all listed on the permit. And we might say, well, look, instead of having 3 different critical controls, we might just group that up and say, well, look, the permit is our critical control. That just kind of groups them all together. So that's not my preferred approach. I like the controls to be specific, measurable and auditable and a few other things. But when we start to get to the minutiae, there are some things you can do, and nothing breaks, providing your verification strategies are still robust if you want to go down that path. Going back to our bow tie analysis as well, where we've broken down our unwanted event or our critical risk and looked at all the different causes and different consequences. When we look at that, we know that not all of those causal pathways or consequence pathways are going to be as likely as another. So if, for example, I have a critical control or a series of critical controls on low likelihood pathways, potentially I can just downgrade those critical controls to just standard controls, because we're not throwing controls out, and then that gives me the reduction in my critical control count, if you like. And the last one is, well, on this list anyway, is around let's say we've got a critical control that's like, oh, we're on the fence. It could be there, might not be, or could be, look, I'm willing to give that one up in inverted commas. What we can do, again, is just downgrade it, but it doesn't mean we can't put in place, let's say, a 6-month checking activity on if we've identified the failure modes, on things that we know to stop that from happening. So we wouldn't necessarily call this stuff a critical control verification, but it doesn't mean we can't put in some proactive checks just to give us that level of confidence that, look, we think this is like a borderline control or critical control. We'll downgrade it, but we'll give ourselves some confidence by putting in place this check and just keep an eye on it. So there's some examples. Really interested to hear what other people have to say on this. I'm always interested to learn, and chat to you later. Bye-bye.